And the title of the panel is The Variety of Cooperative Institutions. We are quite an interesting mix of panelists here. In this panel, there will be 4 presentations, 20 minutes each. Please, this is a plea to the panelists that you take care of the time so that we respect each other's space, and also the space for participants to ask questions. So it's 20 minutes per presentation, and after the 4 presentations, we'll have a discussion of about 30 minutes. So there will be place for questions to the panelists and for some short discussions. So we have Magdalena Kondas from University of Warsaw with the presentation Cooperatives in the Development Aid Discourse. We have Sarah Holzgreve from University of Greifswald. And let me just see the title here. Yeah, she's an independent scholar and GETIDOS fellow. Commoning and Utopia in the Intentional Community of Alt Ungnade in Germany and their meaning for socio-ecological transformation. There is Maria-Daniela Pomohaci from University of Goettingen, Germany, who together with Praveen Verma wrote the paper on Workers' Initiative from Community Kitchen to Workers' Cooperative, which is in Delhi, India. And finally, Dr. Andrzej Klimczuk from Warsaw School of Economics, who will talk about the creative aging policy and future-oriented institutions, combining silver, creative, and social economies.
Yes, perfect.
I suppose that you see the whole presentation, so yeah.
Yeah, it's full screen, yes. Everything is working. So go ahead, Andrzej.
Good. So I will start my clock and I will do the talking a little bit to not bore you to the death actually with the presentation. Actually, it's I'm missing live people, not presenting the files online only. Anyway, the presentation is with the long title. As you see, I like long titles. So as Wojciech mentioned, I represent Warsaw School of Economics in Warsaw in Poland, and we mostly focus on economic perspectives on social economy and social cooperatives and other types of cooperatives. And in my case, actually, I focus much more on combining the social economy with other types of or models of economy. So that will be a little bit much more economical perspective, although I'm not economist. I'm expert in public policy and sociology, so I have a little bit different perspective, I suppose, than most of the people here. So I will start with some policy concepts on aging, later a little bit about every of those 3 types of economy, the silver economy, creative economy, and social and solidarity economy, and later how to combine them actually, because that's the future, possible future of these economic models. So first of all, probably most of you are not focusing that much on issues of aging or demography. So basically in studies on aging and perspectives on aging, we have the few types of aging policy that is like undertaken by international organizations and national organizations, and it was developed during the last years, let's say. So for example, the first notion that you have, the successful aging, as the name says, it's supposed to focus on successful aging, and it was like the notion created in the 90s of the last century. But of course, there could be a possible other side. That's the unsuccessful aging. That's like when you are a older person with all those types of sickness and disabilities, etc. So basically not everyone is aging successfully, right? So there are other, of course, types how you can, by the government mostly, how you can influence on aging. That's the notions like the productive aging, healthy aging, active aging, positive aging, aging in place, intergenerational policy, and the creative aging. So probably the most known is the active aging, actually, because that's the notion used by the United Nations and the European Union and European Commission, to be much more specific. And I will focus on the last one. The creative aging is the least known. It was emerged in 70s actually in United States and in Anglo-Saxon countries, but also during the last 10 years it was highly disseminated in Europe, including UK and Germany, for example, and it focused on something else. It's not focused on sickness, for example, of older people or the living conditions or housing, but it focused on how the aging is related to art, creativity, innovations, and things like that. So, for example, that's like the exercises or activities related to, for example, dancing, singing, making art, basically, by the older people, but also the things like media labs, fab labs, etc., which are sometimes organized by the social entities like the cooperatives or the NGOs or the non-formal groups. So basically that's the focus here. So, and it's related to three types of economy. So one type is the silver economy. It's mostly used in the context of aging. So it's, for example, like the service robotics or the ICT solutions or the devices for the older people or the smart housing, etc. Creative economy, which is the second type, is like mostly focused on the arts and culture. So the core arts field, for example, is like the performing arts, visual arts, and heritage. And later, you in the further circles, you have other sectors like the software, education, tourism. So basically, all of it can be somehow related to older people. And for example, like the designing the devices or designing the rooms for the older people is also creative stuff, basically. And if you combine this with the social economy, for example, you have to focus on something which we call it as a mixed economy of welfare. So it's like, I will go to another slide with that. But basically, you can notice that there is a lot of different entities, different organizations, which can provide the services and products in different ways. So it could be delivered by like direct or indirect. Indirect means that, for example, they are only bypassing or sharing the space. So, for example, like you have the crowdfunding actions or the crowdsourcing actions is a good example of the indirect delivery. So basically, the organizer of the platform, for example, is not delivering the services by themselves, but making the platform for example, startups to gather the money, for example, to make the art or creative aging or care services, for example. So there are plenty of the benefits of the creativity of the for the older people and all of us actually when we are aging. I will maybe not go too much to details actually, but for example, when we focus on aging and art, and when you organize like the activities for the older people and the young people at the same time, then you can at least hypothesize that you can improve the intergenerational dialogue or stimulate volunteer engagement. So that's the additional benefits for the economy, because people are doing something without spending much money actually, which generates additional social values and economic values actually, which can be counted. So the last type of the economy that I'm focusing here is the social economy and the solidarity economy. And maybe I will not focus on a distinction why I use and not or relation, let's say. So in my understanding is mostly focused on the hybrid organizations. So that's basically the model of this mixed economy of welfare. And the last type of organizations is the hybrid organization, when you have these cooperatives, social enterprises, inter-organizational networks, social partnerships, social movements, think tanks, etc. So there's a plenty of entities that are not usually considered in a, let's say, capitalist economy, which is mostly focused on a private sector or the public sector. It's not also the same what is the non-governmental sector, right? So there are plenty of differences and commonalities between these three types. So let's just focus on the last thing. So mostly the social and solidarity economy, for example, focus on the marginalized groups, like the people in poverty, people with disabilities, and in this case also the older people, for example. And in case, for example, of the distribution of products and services, it's like similar to the capitalist, let's say, or the main market, but also it can be based on commonalities or the commons or fair trade, for example. So there is a lot of things like that. In case of, for example, expected effects, the silver economy is mostly focused on something which we call green technologies, or the silver cities, for example, or the age-friendly cities. And in case of the social and solidarity economy, we focus mostly on the social effects, like the social capital, self-help groups, etc., or lowering the digital divide. So to make this much more visual, you can use the three different models to measure how these three types of economy exist or coexist. So in the first view, it's a silo. So basically, there is no relation of each of these types of economy with each other. So basically, they are not collaborating. It's like much more like a competition between the three different types and entities in it. In overlapping view, you can suggest that actually, for example, the cooperatives in a social and solidarity economy are doing some stuff, for example, similar to the silver economy or the creative economy, or both of them. And in the last view, actually, it suggests that actually that the silver economy is like the narrowest view, because it's only focused on a human capital, basically, and the fact that the people are getting older. In the second circle, you are adding the social capital and the fact that the people have some social relations, and the broadest view is the creative economy, in fact, because you focus on creative capital and cultural capital, which basically influence on creating the social and human capital. I know that that's a lot of information, and it could be a little bit complex if you don't know the theories behind it, like the Bourdieu or Putnam theories, but I'm not going to say that here because first, I don't have the time for that, and the second, it's a classic at the moment. So another visualization is when you focus on the relations of what is inside of these three types of economy. So for example, in the social and solidarity economy, you focus mostly on the social capital. In silver economy, on human capital. And at the end, you have these effects below, which is the combining actually effects. On one hand, you can focus on the technical innovations, and on the second hand, on the social innovations for the aging societies or the aging population. And you can also combine the technical and social innovations actually. So for example, it's sometimes called as electronic social innovations or the digital social innovations. So actually, that's the most things actually that we are developing currently online, like with the Creative Commons or the open access movements and things like that. So examples related to aging, and that will be probably the last slide actually. You can organize or categorize the three types of entities and programs related to aging actually Like the first one is the aging services and healthcare programs. The second is like the community building mostly, and the third is only focused on creativity and innovation. So, for example, you have the social services, social centers, senior centers, so-called. So, for example, in Poland, the Poznań city is quite famous of the senior center. In fact, you can have also the volunteer programs and things like that. There is also the universities of the tiered age movement, the elder villages movement. Yesterday there was a presentation actually about the villages in the session. You have the time lab banks, care circles, fab labs, age-friendly cities, men sheets. So basically there's thousands of different types of innovations around us at the moment, and the point is how you can go with having this knowledge, how you can go further with investigating those entities with the quality and quantitative studies, basically. So that's the theory. And I don't, for this conference, unusually, I don't have any recommendations because usually we are presenting the recommendations in a public policy. This time I'm not doing something like that. So let's give some more time for the discussion, I think. So I thank you for your attention. And if you want to follow the things that I was saying to you actually much more, you can follow me on Twitter, for example. And actually, I'm posting a lot of examples of these innovations for the older people or the aging societies actually every day. So it's thousands of them. So I'm not going to bother you with the case studies or the best practices or the worst practices also, because there are also bad practices actually sometimes. Okay, thank you for the attention, and I'm looking forward to see rest of the presentations.
Actually, I believe we still have a little bit of time for you. So
yeah, but I'm not.
Maybe you could give a few examples. So since this is a panel on cooperative institutions, so and
sure.
other presentations.
So, for example, like you have the most disseminated example in Poland probably is the University of Tiered Age, universities of tiered age actually movement. So like the Poland is the most famous of it because we have thousands of them, which is like the biggest network of the universities of tiered age actually in the world at the moment. Previously, it was usually, and you will notice that in the books, it was France where this movement started. There is also the famous group in Australia, for example, in Canada and in China, but in Poland, it was much more disseminated. So basically how it's organized, like the people are creating either the non-formal groups and called these as a universities, either they are affiliated somehow as NGOs or the cooperatives with the universities in a private and public sector. And also you can create the University of the Tiered Age in Poland related as an NGO to the local government, for example. So you can also get some additional funding, although there is not direct program funding on a governmental level. There were some trials to do something like that, but it doesn't exist any longer. So that's the one example. The second example, when you have these fab labs, for example, that photo that I showed you was the example for Eindhoven in Netherlands, where they have actually the media lab focused only on older people, and they are basically developing the robotic stuff during the exercises. I have no idea how they managed to work during the COVID-19. Probably they do some innovative approach to collaborate online. You can also have these men sheets, for example, movements. So which is not coincidence. So the men sheets means that basically the older males are meeting in the sheds. That's like the small wooden houses, you know, like the workshops in your garage or something like that. and they are basically doing some craft and arts stuff, basically just for fun or for the hobby. But the point is that this movement was started mostly because the men's, like the universities of the third age, at least in the Polish case, are quite feminized because they're, as you can imagine, most of us don't survive to the old age. It's like most of the older people actually are the older women. It's like mostly 70% of the older people are the older women. So the males are feeling a little bit excluded in these movements. So they started their own movement, which is the men sheets. So it's like the male clubs. So they are doing the crafts and workshops. I'm not sure, are they in any country organized as a cooperatives, but mostly that's like the non-formal groups. So you cannot normally influence on them in normal, let's say, political, socio-political instruments, because they are not registered anywhere. So there is no databases usually, right? So it's like informal type of activity. So, or you have like another example when you have the age-friendly cities and municipalities or communities. It could be differently translated. So that's the movement that was organized mostly by the World Health Organization from 2007. When they started, actually, there was only a few cities around the world, usually the big cities like the New York and Paris, that was organizing the activities for the people around the few spectrums, few dimensions of the age friendliness. I'm not going farther with the theory here. And at the moment, you have few thousands actually of cities around this movement, which are focusing on making the cities much more age friendly, let's say. And the point is that in all of these places, because that's the guidelines from the World Health Organization, you have to, as a mayor of the city, for example, you have to collaborate with the real people, with the citizens, because the citizens actually should be invited not only to implement this age friendliness in a city, but also to evaluate it. So it's another part of the story. So it's not just making something, but also evaluating, is that actually working, right? Okay, I'm stop talking here because that's probably even more than 20 minutes, but you encouraged me to give some examples. So
it's on me. It's on me.
Yeah, it's on you.
Thank you very much, Andrzej.
Thank you.
I leave questions till the end of the presentation. And
okay, so the topic of my presentation is, broadly speaking, the place of cooperatives in development aid discourse. And I prepared like two parts of this presentation. The first one is the presentation of the historical perspective, like how cooperatives have been used in development aid since the beginning of the 20th century, actually. And the second part is more about my personal experience with cooperators that I got during fieldworks in Armenia and Palestine. Yeah, it works. Okay, so as I mentioned, to better understand the place of co-ops, or broadly speaking, the cooperation in development aid discourse, it is really good to look at this historical overview and to see how this nexus of cooperativism and development aid is developed and is developing, actually. So, of course, while doing this, it is rather impossible to escape some generalizations, but I think that despite we have many local perspectives and many local contexts, since we are talking about the global governance or international agencies or some other international actors which are actually specialized in provision development aid or standing on the guard of the current economic system or presenting some ideas and solutions to governments for implementing new policies, I think it's quite justified to to use at this phenomenon as a whole and global one. So having a bit justified myself, I would like to briefly outline this more than century-long relationship between foreign engagement and the development of cooperatives. So in many countries, especially in Africa and Asia, including Middle East, first cooperatives, as you may know, were introduced by colonial powers. And the main objective of such introduction was maybe not altruistic one, but rather to ensure a smooth extraction of surplus, support European settlers, or introduce natives into organizational forms, by the way, designed in the West, of monetized economy controlled by colonial masters. This doesn't necessarily mean that we speak about the form of coercion. In fact, different approaches were observed, for example, in French West Africa, where since 1915, like the first cooperative was opened in 1915, but the membership was compulsory for African farmers, and it was obligatory for French colonizers and those who were perceived as assimilated. On the other hand, we have Kenyan example, where the first 36 years of cooperatives were marked by racial exclusion of Black farmers, and the cooperatives were the members of cooperatives were only people like from Great Britain and some settlers. But on the other hand, we have Nigerian, which is also like a Nigerian example, which was also like the British controlled territory, where the first cooperative was established quite independently, and it was operating freely, and this kind of voluntary membership was vivid almost throughout the whole period of colonization. However, it doesn't mean that it was somehow a part or opposite to colonial structures. In fact, it had been quite quickly adapted to more general approach to adapt local institutions for the promotion of colonial objectives and the ambitions of native cooperators. They wanted to enter free market, were quite quickly tempered by colonial governments, and the role was reduced to the provision of products and services to Western British companies. And the development of the first cooperatives was also associated with a widespread presumption that the indigenous people do not know the proper strategies for cooperation that would allow them to develop their societies and their patterns of cooperation, as you may see also the quotes that I presented on this slide. You can see that it was the presumption that they don't know how to cooperate to guarantee economic development, that they are ineffective, rather lazy, and they need to get this organizational form that would allow them to be more structured and to enter a market on the some presumptions that were presented by European masters. And in this context, we can see that the first cooperatives and organizational know-how streaming from Europe aimed also at education and more general social modernization, which is important if we are talking about development aid. And this resulted in technical assistance, setting up educational institutions for agriculture, and the deployment of Western educated experts to co-op. Here we can also see like how was, no, this is the next slide, sorry. So to briefly point out like the next important turning point for developmentalists and how they use this cooperative movement to introduce some development ideas, we need to, however, skip first decades of independence and the last decade of colonialism and go through decades to structural adjustment programs. and then broader neoliberal turn in development aid. Structural adjustment programs, as it was stated via law, resulted in the impoverishment of masses, and this created a classic scenario for the development of cooperatives. So in fact, we had a situation where the SAPs, based on, in fact, resilience strategies and coping strategies of those who were most severely affected by liberalization, withdrawal of the state from provision of services, reduction of real wages. And after the first years of privatization and marketization, it became quite obvious that the proposed success was way more than economists have projected. In the World Bank's Promoting Rural Cooperatives in Developing Countries paper of 1991, authors noticed that despite SAPs in sub-Saharan Africa have improved the performance of agricultural sector, so we have macroeconomic indicators, the performance of cooperatives, soundly supported by donors, has been disappointed. And what was to blame was, of course, lack of business rationality and marketing skills among members, parastatal past of many cooperatives, and inability to adapt to market requirements, connected with lack of infrastructure and government commitment to the development of market-oriented cooperatives. And if we look at the language of this report, we can see that social objectives were less important than successful business performance. And in fact, this market salvation was something that the designers of structural adjustment programs really believed in. And we can see that also, like this social dimension would rather distract cooperative members and didn't allow them to really succeed in the market. So not going, so this is also like how the narrative, how rural organization can contribute to rural development. But not going into details, we can conclude that the last decades of 20th century opened the actual debate in the international aid, how cooperatives and community development should be supported by international community, how cooperatives can cushion negative impact of liberalization. And in this phase, we have the cooperatives as entities developed as market-oriented entities, and the manifestation of farmers willing to join market exchange and benefit from economies of scale. And what is also important, this is like the first phase where the economic empowerment of women were also introduced as the objective for development aid. So late 90s and the first years of 2000s, of course, brought a general disappointment in this kind of projects and this kind of general structure of development aid. It has become obvious that the initial promise of catching up based on the infinite economic growth principle cannot survive confronted with growing inequalities and stepping climate catastrophe. However, deeply rooted developmentality of international society has not quitted the broader idea of making societies more sustainable and, more sustainable and more developed. In the early 2000s, World Bank developed a new approach, which was community-driven development, and it was a strategy of a paradigm of poverty reduction and the conveyance of democratic values. Democratization was the new goal of the new concern of international society, and it still is. The new phase of transition and democratization marked the new interest in cooperatives, community-based solutions, and resilience strategies. The end of the 90s brought also the concept of social entrepreneurship, widely associated with cooperatives, especially those of the new generation, as market-driven but social-oriented solutions to all top-listed global problems enshrined in Millennium Development Goals and later in Sustainable Development Goals. The usage of community resources and resourcefulness, including voluntary work of members, local knowledge, cooperation and municipal assets to deliver punctual relief and spur innovation may be, however, seen as a privatization or institutional framing of local commons and coping strategies. This approach, in spite of being often effective in recognizing the symptoms, doesn't touch the structural problems and turns a blind eye to the power relations that create current situation. It also reproduces the belief that communities should apolitically help themselves within the existing paradigm. And what we can see that the cooperation as the grassroots level has become a key to correct market failures. So in fact, we had a situation where the people in the most vulnerable position and left on the margins by market forces are asked to go to the dragon and negotiate with it and ask the dragon not to eat them. So now are we going to the next part of my presentation, which bases on my fieldwork. So as I mentioned, I spent few months in the Republic of Armenia and Palestine. One could say that these regions are too different to compare them, but in fact, when we look at some regionalization done by UN agencies, we can see that they are basically the same region. This is like Middle East and West Asia. And what is also important, they are almost like the full, like the whole developing world, or the third world, if you prefer, displayed to the same development discourse with the same priorities and narratives. In Armenia, I had a chance to visit 3 villages in Spitak region, Tsogamark, Hognik, and Torosgyur. I was introduced to the local communities, especially women, by an NGO worker, Arpine. And despite the fact that I came there to do a research on social entrepreneurship of women, I was asked by Arpine to convince, with my European expertise, the community of Tsogamark that they should establish a cooperative producing dried fruits and selling them in the market. As I was introduced to the general idea by Arpine, such cooperation would help the community and spur the broader cooperation. She herself, living in the village, wanted to open a small agri-tourism business and somehow linked it to the business initiatives of other inhabitants. Despite fierce discussion, this idea was rejected by community members, and different arguments emerged to defend the reluctance of the villagers. Next stop in this field work, that was the one in the Spitak region, was the village school in Torosgyur, where I met the teachers who established, with the support of this NGO, a small cooperative next to the school. The enterprise itself wasn't spectacular, and actually cooperators decided that there is no point to even show me this entity, this place. Instead, we spent few hours discussing their current situation and the daily lives of the teachers. Most of them were living in the nearby city of Gyumri, and the money that they could make from teaching was about €100 per month per full-time job. And they were forced to hitchhike every day to get into their workplace, and many of them survived only thanks to remittances sent by their husbands or sons working in Russia. Asked about perspectives for life and conditions for development, they agreed that the factory or other big investment would allow their families to reunite, live in dignity, and escape from debts that they had. A few months earlier, I was invited by Oxfam spin-off to Tavush region, where again I was asked to convince people from different cooperatives this time to cooperate closer and create a bigger league that would be more successful in the market. The workshop took place in the best hotel in Dilijan, and it was obvious that that was probably the first time that cooperators entered such interiors, and they were amazed by glass elevators, by catering, and so on. During chit-chat with one of the cooperators, Al-Rus, who was herself a refugee from Azerbaijan, and she was also a member of the poster child of the poster child cooperative working in this region. She disclosed that she was really happy to work in the cooperative and that this gave her additional joy and occasion to meet her friends. But asked about how many women are empowered by established greenhouse, she admitted that more than 50% have already dropped out. She said that donors do not know the realities of gardening, as they insisted of having 40 women empowered by one greenhouse of 400 square meters, which, as we can easily calculate, is 1 woman per 10 square meters. At first, fresh cooperators tried to establish working shifts to somehow make this cooperation working, but in fact, this overcrowding finally forced many of them to leave the entity. Going to the Palestinian case, I met women from the cooperative operating in Hebron and Ibna. Where the cooperative was founded, it was founded quite independently. However, the leader of the cooperative, because there was like one visibly leading woman, knew that there are funding opportunities from donors, and she from the very beginning thought about having this encounter with international support. What the cooperative does is they sell traditional Palestinian handicraft, using this opportunity to also spread the political agenda against Israeli occupation and earn additional income. They design patterns together, have a carpet weaving machine in their premises, but the growth of the production is home-based, and the cooperators just bring ready items to cooperative. The production is tourist-oriented. Cooperative sells products both stationary in Hebron, and also sells products abroad, mostly to US and Europe. Cooperative is active internationally, also in terms of seeking partnerships with development aid apparatus, and the members of cooperative spend actually a lot of time to convince development aid agencies that they are worth supporting. Last time, however, for the cooperative was not easy. The founder and leader of this cooperative lost her husband due to who died after being treated with gas by Israeli soldiers. She was left with 3 children. The stationery shop in Hebron was plundered by settlers, and coronavirus stopped tourist flow and shipping possibilities. In fact, the cooperative is left with hundreds of ready items, each of whom consumed many hours of embroidery work. Development agencies do not support individual members, and they cannot fix, of course, external conditions impacting the financial situation of the cooperative. The woman that I met there, one of them, Hamida, was one of the members, and she joined cooperative after her husband died. She also started English language classes, and the current situation is that she is basically left with no money, and she tries to sell the products she would deliver to cooperative 4 times cheaper than the price agreed in co-op. She doesn't want anyone from co-op to know that about her efforts, but she dreams of having her own business, selling abroad, and at least once travel outside Palestine. So to sum up, what we can see from the historical overview is that co-ops have been used as development tools by foreign aid since the very beginning of the sector. Their social and economic dimensions make them the great, actually ideal discursive forms for almost every type of development and every objective that development aid can imagine. So whether it's social or economic, cooperatives are the perfect match for development aid. But the everyday stories of the members of the current COPs supported by development sector show shortcomings of cooperation taught top-down by apparatus. Such examples show how development aid really is. So it's like not great, not terrible. And what is sure, not only from my presentation, is that the recipients of such aid are not passive. They negotiate with NGO workers, and their limited trust in the optimistic narratives of growth and development, if not being a sign of agency, might be perceived as an act of defense. Withdrawing from projects designed to satisfy donors with the calculated number of empowered women may be a manifestation of discontent toward whole residualism and unsustainable patterns of punctual community development. The gender dimension in such project is also striking. In fact, we have the women who are targeted as main figures to be empowered, to be top-down empowered. But they are also like perceived as the active local agents and disseminators of development agenda. In reality, many projects demand unpaid engagement from them, presence during trainings, additional work, while the results are not satisfactory in terms of the presumed objectives, which are income generation, power shifts within household, and general mysterious social empowerment. The participation in projects, however, gives many of them occasion to do something together, which is also important. And the situation is that they are often the only, they have female-headed households due to the death of the husband or the migration. So this is also opportunity for them to do something together with other women. Negotiate with NGO sector and development sector, learn new technical knowledge, and what is the most important probably is receive access to equipment, which at least help them to produce food for their families, as this soundly promoted cooperatives usually turn into like regular gardens. Sometimes they are also able to sell small amounts in the local market. What is definitely that we get from this picture is that system problems, which creates the general matrix for action. So either it is occupation or general neoliberal agenda and modes of doing things and terms of exchange. This kind of things cannot be changed with punctual and apolitical solutions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Magda.
Yes, that looks fine. Okay, well, now I will need to say next slide all the time, I guess, but we'll manage. Yes, so welcome to my presentation with the title Commoning and Utopia and the Intentional Community of Alt Ungnade, Germany, and the Interpretation for Socio-Ecological Transformation. In the background, you see some small buildings, and that are trailers in German called Bauwagen. So trailers on wheels made of wood. Most of them have been built by the dwellers themselves and fired by wood as well. So it's a very self-sustained small community of 25 people. And actually, I lived in this community when doing the research. So it's a participatory research that I'll be taking you into. Next slide, please. Yes, over the last 15 years, I've been here and there in different sorts of voluntary settings and cooperation communities, from fair trade shops to environmental pedagogical work and this community, for example. And the question rose up again and again, how to consciously develop our commons or these cooperational settings into small real utopia. So how to strengthen this transformative potential that these organizational forms have. And Magdalena says, how to get past power structures that keep us and hinder us. So what is needed for this commoning process to work is the second question deriving from that. And how, in the last step I will do here in the third step, how could our societies look like if we take commons as a point of reference? That's the utopian aspect. And next slide, please. I'll first go into theory. As you see here, these pot plants in the background, a picture of my sister actually. There are so many theories and ideas around that I just love to put them together and see where they can enrich each other. And there's 3 theories or 3 approaches that I combined here for my presentation. Please, next slide. And one of them is the commons approach, of course, which you see here on the right. The commons as situated by a commonest community, so a group of people, plus resources, natural resources in sense of Ostrom, or in sense of the new commons, they also can be digital or knowledge commons, plus the third, the institutions of collective action, the rules and agreements made. So this is the commons approach by definition. And if we look at intentional communities and the definition of that, it's a community or a group of people that decides to live together, to pursue immaterial aims together, be inclusive and oppose violence, and aim at consensus. So maybe that would also be a set of a possibility for the setting in Palestine to put the women that lost their husbands and groups like that. Well, that's the next course. So yes, if we have an intentional community and extend the view to the resources, then we get a common setting. And next slide, please. And so that's the setting we have and that we'll be looking at. And how I'm looking at it via the lens of, I'm looking at the process of utopian thinking. Utopian thinking, that is a method derived from Ruth Levitas, a sociologist and philosopher who wrote the book Utopia's Method. And let me cite, utopian thinking makes explicit embedded ideas of the good of society and brings them to democratic debate. And if you look at this small scheme here, we have an individual basis and the single dwellers of a village or a community or a city or a Palestine corporation. We have these unfilled longings to have a basic income, to have a place to wash your dishes and your clothes, to have something to eat and places for your children. And if they are not, if they're not fulfilled, there is a systemic criticism in that. And it's this unfilled longing that is sort of the basis of transformation or revolutionary action. And from that derive dreams, undefined yearnings and hope for change that are a bit more concrete, dreams for what we need to change. And if people put their heads together and discuss, visions can emerge. Visions on community level, city level, or corporation level. Visions that are like detailed imaginations of how things could be better and different. And if yet we put this together and there's a dialogue between all the visions on smaller levels, then we get to utopia, to the level of society. Utopia meaning a holistic sketch of a different society consisting of smaller visions. And here's an important point to be made. When I'm talking about utopia, I don't mean a blueprint, like a solid picture we can head to and reach, and then it's all great. Blueprints often lead into traps like NS in Germany or dictatorial systems. But utopia, after Ruth Levitas, always is something fluent and rearranging itself all the time. And next slide, please. And that we see here in the tool that Ruth Levitas suggests and that I put into these nice circles. By the way, I really liked your circles in the first slide on civil society. just like these diagrams. So what we see here are 3 modes: the mode of archaeology, ontology, and architecture. And what do they mean? There's 3 ways of looking at our dreams and longings to come to larger visions of utopia. And in detail, it is first, they'll look at the shards, the fragments that we have all around us of values and ideas of good society. And that can be the election papers of parties. It can be a sketch in a book. It can be a lot of things. It can be the values that a society lives by. And some of them we might decide to take on, and others we might decide to put on the dustbin of history, like these exclusion of certain groups of people, blacks, for example, or elderly, or whoever that might be in the context. So choose what shards to take. Second one, ontology. Ontology means the picture of a good human life, an individual good human life. And in the way that in whatever utopia you might put yourself or imagine to be, can you have a good life here, even if you're a handicapped person, a woman, an elderly person, or other hindrances and difficulties for you? So what does make up these elements of a good life? And the third step then is to put that together, the values and the elements of a good life, and to become more concrete, more detailed, how that could look like. And that's the architecture. And after that, you're not finished. Now you could say we have a utopia here, lovely, or a vision of a good society, lovely. But that's not the end. You have to go through this process again and again, be it on an individual level for your own dreams and visions, or on the community or corporation level, unless you get stuck. If you don't do this circle again, you get stuck and you end up in a situation where powers become stagnant, where some people are not seen or heard, and exclusion happens. So it really has to continue. Next slide, please. I think I have to be a bit faster. Yes. So the fourth element I bring in here as the fourth pot plant, so to say.
You have about 10 minutes left.
Yes, thanks. Is the search for patterns of successful commoning. That is to mean the search for the things that work and that need to be taken into account so that it will work. If you don't do that, you'll stand there again and again, and it doesn't work, and people leave, and things break apart, and it's frustrating. And I've experienced that so much in my work with bottom-up work, and I think many of you maybe too. That's just a helpful tool I draw on here. Was coined by by Christopher Alexander in the 70s, and recently retrieved by Silke Helfrich to put into that field of commoning. And what is a pattern? A pattern simply is the combination of a problem, context, and solution. So you can, of course, look for universal patterns and solutions, but they always have to be looked at in the context. Yeah, and they can be applied in all the fields I just mentioned in the utopian thinking, in community dynamics, and also in the commoning. Next slide, please. Yes, so now we get to the case study. This is a small rural village of Alt Ungnade, or the community piece of it. It's all in all a village of about 50 people. And the community makes half of that, 25 people with some elders, some children, but the oldest ones, to be true, are only 50. So not real elders, with some sheep and chicken and apple trees and all you'd like, and living in these small, lovely wooden dwellings. And they've got a quite strong, how to say, yeah, well, they want to be sustainable, and they see themselves as a socio-ecological community. Next slide, please. And here you've got some pictures, yeah, of the sheep and whatever, all the lovely nature here. And yeah, they just want to have a simple creative lifestyle with varying intensity of communitarian reality. There also is a flow in that, as in most corporations as well. The common goods economy is embedded with the shared management and the rotary system of responsibilities. There are weekly meetings with all the people, and a lot of meetings in between and talks between 2 or 3 of people who organize something. And here in the right corner, you see a very important picture. Some of the members sitting at the table, and it's about finances and it's hard work, and some just can't concentrate anymore. But that's reality. So next slide, please. What did I do in this community? I had a look at the challenges people face or see. Some of them have been there for about 18 years. Indeed, others only 2 or 1 year. So challenges and key challenges and solutions. I made interviews on that. And in the second step, I organized a Futures Council after the utopian thinking model of Rotlevitas that I introduced earlier. And down here you see a wooden trailer from the inside and the candle we lit for the occasion. But next slide, please. Before, so after conducting the interviews, or while conducting the interviews, there were quite a lot of problems occurring. Social relations on ice. There was a huge conflict, and at the end, 2 of the community members actually left, or was decided that they should leave the community. Yeah, and also there were a lot of power issues here. And secondly, before the Futures Council, one of the stables and buildings just burned down. One was like a hit in the face of the whole community. But also a strong community process initiated by that. Yes, so next slide, please. I took the results of all this and put it of the interview, sorry, put it into a matrix like this for all the fields of commoning and commons, and this only is a center. The commoning aspect, I did it for society and resources as well. And next slide, please. Here was just one enlarger, because that's what the conference is about. So here, what you see here are solutions that the members named for good cooperation to overcome all differences. And yeah, and what you see here is a congruency of work and benefit. And that's really important, because people are not paid. It's voluntary work, and it has to be valued. Also, the motivation is a key issue, and he named the danger of the tragedy of the commons, so the neglect of common property. A very important point is this daring to dream and a good management of the community finances. Yeah. Something that's not put in here but very important is to overcome old assumptions, like nothing will change if we do anything, so just let it rot and break, and it will be broken soon enough. And what was very important here as well was that almost every interviewee said we have too less time and too less resources for our work here. And everyone said that. So it's this fast livingness that also was present in this rural community. So next slide, please. Yeah. The results of the visioning or of the whole process can be seen here. And it was a really lovely council that we held, and I just can recommend to get onto this level of consciously talking about that issues of values of the community or the entity, of the conditions for good life for all, and to really have a look at the visions. And what came out here was that the key value is authentic conviviality oriented on sustainability. And there was a tension between stability and change and the individuals in the group. When we go to ontology, time and personal capacity, as I just said, are key issues, and the closeness to nature. And also, and here I am coming back to the first presentation of the day, of the session, better community infrastructures for families and elders, because there's a lot of slippery ground. The way to the washing machine is quite far for some. In the winter, you did not have a hot shower, but had to do something with a bowl and hot water yourself. So better community infrastructure for them. They are left out, and usually they leave after some time. Families and elders are the ones who move away. And the visions that come from that, please next slide. I forgot to say, for each of these models or modes of the method, I had one round of counseling. So there was a piece of an apple or something, and the people just gave to the neighbor, and everyone said something to that. We had 4 rounds, and the third round were the concrete visions, and they were differing. I identified 3 different ones. There was one of change, but with low hierarchies and small dreams only in simplicity, pragmatic, authentic relations. And on the other end of the of this scale, there were really large dreams of new buildings, of meta structures, of becoming more open to the outside, like a seminar house, stuff like that. Becoming more engaged politically also, but visions and dreams that really need intense and close and well-organized community. Next, please. Yeah, that's something more concrete. Here, they wanted to build a platform on the highest stable to have a good view on the sunset. And it was actually conducted a bit later on. Next slide. And the dreams for a new large community house with places for seminars and also potential to give people a place to work, like a corporation in the community, and earn money. That would be something new. That also was part of that vision. And actually, I'm still in, I don't live there anymore, but still in contact. And they've got European support money indeed for that project right now. And we'll start building quite soon. So yeah, this vision came true. The ones who didn't want large visions feel a bit left out now. Yeah, that's how it is. Next slide, please. There was one elder of the community, actually the owner of the whole place, who had a vision from the year 2040. Was a lot of experimental buildings, spaces for families and elders, an ecological agriculture in the hands of the community on all the fields around. It's a large place of monoculture and fields to the horizon with monoculture. Yeah, shared ownership, and a lot of apple trees and small pathways to walk. And everyone likes and appreciates each other. That was important for him. So that's the last vision, and I maybe I'll see whether it comes true or not. And next slide, please. Yes, so I think I said all that already. Well, the key challenge have to do with our societal challenges. And next slide. I think my time is running out. Yes.
It has already, yes. So please come to concluding remarks.
Yeah, I will come to conclusion. The last step that I'd like to share with you is how we can build larger utopias or visions from small visions like that, which I just presented. I had a look at key patterns that became visible in this whole process. And just to say one, there were these issues of time and of scarce time and power that people felt. And there's, I looked for where to find that in society. And of course, there's this whole trend of Beschleunigung, of everything gets faster and faster. And people felt overwhelmed by the complexity of everything. And there's this sociologist, Hartmut Rosa, who said, well, the antidote to that is resonance, to become more interrelated again. And that's what the community also seeks for by these authentic encounters. So if I take this pattern, resonance, as an answer to the problem of everything getting faster, I can look, how could I build a society around this pattern of resonance? And next slide, please. And I'll just read this out. Here's my sketch of a societal utopia as derived from this small village of trailer dwellers. It would be a decentral society of authentic and welcoming encounters, organized in fluent, informal and formal circles, as in the concept of socio-ecological, you can read it, sociocracy, opening new spaces for interpersonal resonance and responsibility, and a different approach on time and work than today. All that combined with the pragmatist, playful approach in shaping and preserving natural and cultural spaces as commons. That would be lovely, I think. Next slide, please. Well, but of course, this also would have to be reflected and brought into dialogue. What is left out here? Where's the dystopia in that? Maybe not all people want to sit into those age-long meetings and get frustrated. And is it, for whom is this utopia? Who cannot take part? Maybe because he can't express himself or so on. Yeah, so that's what how this could be continued. And as a last thought, this process model of utopia that I am presenting here asks a great deal of people in terms of time and effort. And with the end state model, the blueprint does not ask enough of people, this process model based on community and cooperation may ask and give too much. And I'll leave with that. And 2 slides further, please, to my final slide. Further. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sarah, for a very interesting presentation. I'm happy we managed to see that, and we proceed to the final presentation.
Hi.
Yes, Maria-Daniela Pomohaci from the University of Goettingen, Germany. Do you have a presentation?
Yes, I have a presentation. I will share the screen with you. Probably it will work. Can you see it?
Perfect.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It's okay. So
12:10, so until 12:30.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for having us here today. So as Wojciech said, that my name is Maria-Daniela Pomohaci, and I'm a PhD student of labor history at the Center for Modern Indian Studies at the University of Goettingen.
And I'm Praveen Verma. I am a PhD. I'm Praveen. Can you hear me?
Wait 1 second. I think I will have to. Okay, I'm going to first. Try it.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Sorry. Yeah, my name is Praveen Verma, and I'm a PhD student at University of Delhi, Department of History as well. Yeah.
So we are both students of Indian history, so more precisely of caste and labor of colonial and post-colonial India. As you can see from our title today, we're gonna talk about the community kitchen, which is going forward to become a workers' cooperative. So as we all know, this pandemic, which forced the lockdown, or the lockdowns actually at various stages in almost all the countries, pushed the working class to the margins. So since last March, we have been involved in a relief work in Delhi. So more exactly, together with other scholars, activists, volunteers, we started a community kitchen to support the migrant workers left without any job or means of subsistence. So although the lockdown was lifted, the condition for working did not improve and still has not improved much more ever since. So the impact of the lockdown was such that it cost more than 21 million salary jobs. Therefore, we started thinking of a long-term solution for the unemployment problems of these migrant workers, to whom we were distributing cooked food and dry rations. So we decided to form a cooperative. But more about this, actually, my colleague Praveen will tell you in a bit. So before that, I would like to give you a brief introduction to the cooperative movement in India. So listening to the other presentations from yesterday as well as today, I realized that most of them, they focus on Europe. So maybe before we start talking about the cooperative and our plans for transforming the community kitchen into a cooperative, we will also talk a bit about the Indian context, just briefly. So as you can imagine, the cooperative movement in India has its own status, role, and impact in the socio-economic development of the country. And I'm talking especially about the creating of a framework for providing organizational and financial support to give motivation to income-generating activities for the weaker section, such as small and marginal farmers, artisan, weavers, landless agricultural laborers, fishermen, urban poor, and so on. So even before formal cooperative structure came into being through the passing of the first cooperative law, which was in 1904 during colonial India, the practice of the concept of cooperation and cooperative activities were prevalent in several parts of India. So for instance, in village communities, collectively created permanent assets like village tanks or village forests called Devrai or Vanarai was fairly common. So similarly, instances of pooling of resources of groups like food grains after harvest to lend to needy members of the group before the next harvest, or collecting small contributions in cash at regular intervals to lend to the members of the groups. So you had the chit funds in the Madras presidency, then you have Kuryas in Kerala, Bishis in Maharashtra, Vish in Gujarat and Rajasthan, and these are only some of the examples of informal cooperative prevailing in the local regions. So the Hadas of Kolhapur were farmers impounded water by pulling up bounds and agreed to ensure equitable distribution of water, as well as harvesting and transporting of produce of members to the market, and the Lana, which were yearly partnerships of peasants to cultivate jointly and distribute the harvest produce in proportion to the labor, and bullock power contributed by their partners. So all of these were similar instances of cooperation without any state legislation support. Nevertheless, the first cooperative societies were started on the initiative of the colonial officials, as I said, in 1904, essentially as the best way of enabling farmers to get out of the clutches of moneylenders, seen as the major cause of widespread rural poverty. So gradually, the scope got extended beyond agricultural credit to cover numerous other activities, including production, finance, marketing, and processing in a wide range of sectors, as well as trading of several important farm products, consumer stores, and housing. So the scale of operation of cooperatives in India has grown enormously, actually, in these 100 years. So unfortunately, I don't have the numbers for the 2019, but according to the National Cooperative Union of India, in 2016-17, there were more than 500,000 various types of cooperative societies with a membership exceeding 1.5 lakhs. That means 150,000 members. Over the years, cooperatives have made concerted efforts to improve the neglected and downtrodden sections of the society. So the Indian society and economy, particularly in the rural sector, is largely influenced by cooperatives. And we have more than 550 cooperatives are working in the urban and rural areas, which are engaged in providing economic and social services to the poor masses throughout carrying out various types of activities. So although the cooperative movement in India was started by far-sighted colonial officials and later actually became an instrument of the developed state in the post-independence era, unfortunately, it has never become a popular movement driven by its members. So the reason for this will be better explained actually by my colleague, and who also has more of a first-hand experience with the legislation regarding setting up a cooperative in India. So now I will ask Praveen to go on. I will still keep this slide. I will just 1 second to unmute my microphones. That will don't create microphone.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, all of you?
Now better, yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi.
Okay.
So basically,
but there is some looping. So, can you try again?
Is it still there?
Now it seems okay.
Okay, cool. I mean, as we all know that the global pandemic COVID-19 struck India as well as other countries. I mean, almost all the countries. And like other governments in most of the countries, government of India also enforced a lockdown to contain the spread of the virus. I don't know how successful they were in India or in other part of the world. But that costed a lot of, I mean, millions of the migrant workers employed in the big cities like Delhi, the health crisis as well as the financial crisis. Basically, the health crisis immediately doubled up as a subsistence crisis with their employment gone. They were unable to sustain themselves and their families in cities, with their families in the cities like Delhi. With little money and severely restricted mobility, these workers were stranded in the cities without any job or even the financial means of returning to their villages. Delhi is a big city where the most of the working force in informal sector, as much as to 92% of the informal sector consist of migrant workers. So one can imagine when the jobs were gone and their mobility were restricted, what can happen. So understanding the workers' dire need for food and assistance, and group of us, people, students, faculties, research scholars, civil rights activists, lawyers, they came together and in a very rushed way, we had a meeting and we decided we should do something for the migrant worker. So what we started is something called Workers' Dhaba. Dhaba is a cooking place. So cooking place for the workers. So basically workers' kitchen in Delhi. So we started the lockdown happened in Delhi on end of the March. And immediately after that, we set up the kitchen. Our aim was to distribute cooked food and the dry ration supplies to these working class families in different areas of the city. And from the very beginning, the main purpose of the Workers' Dhaba, Workers' Kitchen, was to build community kitchens together with workers and their families. So what we wanted to do two sort of, from the beginning, some of us were very clear about it, that doing a relief work is one thing, and going towards a sustainable efforts while creating some kind of a solidarity among the working class is another effort. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to move ahead from there. We wanted to move ahead and try to build the community kitchen where the people from the community itself comes and cook together. While we were collecting funds from the public domain, not from the government and not from any of the corporate funding. So we were collecting funds for the dry rations, and we thought the working class or the stranded workers should come together, or we should make an effort to do that. So what happened is, although the lockdown was lifted on June 2, by that time, within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we could manage to open 2 new community kitchens in 2 different settlements. I tell you a geographical explanation of that area where we're distributing. So if you see in the map, most of the places or all of the places in the map are those settlements, almost 100% consisted of the migrant labor. So when we were distributing food to these areas, we were also having a discussion, we were also having an engagement, regular engagement with the workers and the people living in these colonies, in the settlement. And almost all those settlements in state's language are illegal settlements. So for example, the people who reside there accept their own thing on belongings, they cannot claim to their place of living. So these were the areas which was hit hard by this pandemic. So in April, 2 new kitchens were established directly in the neighborhoods in these settlements, where food was cooked and distributed at the same time. And after the lockdown in India was lifted on June 8, many of the workers have not been able to return to their previous jobs due to economic restrictions. Hence, the need for food still persists. And that was the reason we didn't stop cooking. We didn't stop providing dry ration kits. Initially, one can see the relief work pattern in Delhi in 2 phases. One phase was initially when the lockdown happened. There were a lot of groups, a lot of individuals, a lot of organizations and NGOs who came together where they were providing dry rations as well as the cooked food to the working class. But within 2 months or 2.5 months, they all got worked up, and they one by one, there was one can count the number of organizations or number of efforts like us who were distributing food and supporting the working class in Delhi. So what we did is some of the, while we were as I said, that from the very beginning, we were very much aware about that what we're going to do with this, or which direction we want to go in, and that the direction was to create a kind of a sustainable effort. And while having the regular conversation and the discussion with the people, workers living in this settlement, the workers came with this idea: we should do something together. So the idea of cooperative in a very rigid term or in a very discourse term wasn't there, but there was a fair idea that we should do something together. And one could read that situation in 2 ways. One is like, okay, they had their kind of some sort of an attachment together, but at the same time, it's a critique of the economic model and the state's model, which has been, I mean, the neoliberal framework which has been running in this country. So we thought, okay, let's do something. We can do something with this thing together, and there is something called cooperatives, and we can start doing something with all the people there. So there are 2 things. Why did we decide to form a cooperative? First thing, as I said, that the demands and this question of coming together and working together came from the volunteer, and they could see that the work after and during lockdown, the work they were indulging won't be sustainable and regular. And when I'm saying the work won't be sustainable and regular, and I'm talking about the workers who were living in these settlements. So mostly the people who are living in these settlements are cooks, tailors, sanitation workers, and the waste workers. In the first picture on your left, you can see the entire colony or the entire settlement consists of a waste worker, which is in a small, almost size of 2 football field or 2 football field. Almost 5,000 waste worker lives here across the railway line. Second, one of the second reason why we decide to walk or go towards a cooperative, some of us have been working in the universities with the contractual worker. I mean, I'm a PhD students, and with other students, we have been trying to create something with the contractual worker, whether it's the cleaning staff, whether in the library. Almost 70% of the staff, teaching and non-teaching, both staff in universities like Delhi University, are on contract. So we have been we've been thinking through those lines, working in this. Third thing which made us to think going towards the cooperative, we came from the Waste Workers Collective. So the big settlement consists of waste worker, where their status as a citizen is in danger, especially after there's a recent court judgment came. I mean, there are 3 judgments came. One is CAA called Citizenship Amendment Act. Second is NPR. I'll talk about a little bit about that. National Register. And third is the new ruling came that all the illegal settlement which comes under the purview of state notion, they should be demolished within 6 months. So we thought of working with the waste workers. And fourth thing, that cooperative in urban setups, we have been thinking for some times, and we have many examples, especially in India, where the cooperatives are set up in the rural areas, concentrated to a specific sector and occupation mostly. However, the demand for an urban working environment ask for a different approach than those. So these are the 4 or 5 things which we have in our mind, and that's why we were thinking of going towards the making of cooperatives. And with that making of cooperative, we did not stop working with the workers. We have been working for a long time. We have initiated some of the work, which we will talk about it. Maria?
Okay, so it's okay. Sorry. So it's not only about the cooperative kitchen, but also there are other projects which will come under this. So as Praveen also said, we are not only talking about cooks and persons working in this hospitality or waste workers, but also we are talking about sanitation workers. And sanitation workers actually known in India, I mean, I'm sure that you have some knowledge about this, about being called manual scavengers, and there's a stigma related to them. So then we have been running a campaign with the sanitation workers actually in different neighborhoods around our community kitchens. And the work mostly involves a campaign against actually this type of stigmatization around sanitation work and the workers. So it is a needed of an awareness campaign, and it has been initiated, and it has to be supported, and it has to be understood that the work that is being done by these workers and these laborers is essential. And especially now when we are talking about this pandemic, especially in these times, their work is much more important than perhaps it was in the past. So also on parallel, what we have been doing is also we are distributing small sanitation kits and masks to the sanitation workers. And with their help also, we went to this these communities, these slum areas or jugis being called, and also we sanitized all the houses there. So this is another type. Then there were small other projects that came up, and they were during that time. So for instance, this one is just we had to do like a very fast relief kind of a work, and in the sense that it was a storm, a very powerful storm, and you can see that from the photos, the previous photos, that these people live in made shafts which are not so steady. So due to the storm, their tarpaulin got destroyed. So then we gathered money and we managed to distribute these tarpaulin sheets. Another thing is actually mask making. So many of the skilled laborers, and we are talking now about tailors, lost their employment due to the lockdowns. So unfortunately, most of them still remain unemployed even today. So therefore, we started making cotton masks in order to cater for this actually new market with the pandemic and everything. So the community residents have the requisite skills for this. So hence our initiative created a livelihood source for the tailors. So some of these masks actually were sold in the market, but also we distribute a big number of them for free to the areas where actually were also distributed the food. So our aim was to continue building solidarity actually across working class communities while simultaneously creating livelihood resources. Would you like, Praveen, to talk a bit more about the, yeah, okay, I'll again unmute mine so that you can
just that you know that that we have reached the time limit, so so to have at least a little bit time for the discussion, please come to
Just
concluding
two
remarks.
things I will mention quickly in 1 minute, and I'm not going to expand more than that. So with that, as Maria was talking about the mask making with the tailors and the campaign with the sanitation workers, we are also planning to do a start with the cooperative kitchen with the help of these workers, where these workers can be accumulated together, and we are planning to sell food sustainable. Cheap and hygienic food amongst the working two different neighborhood in Delhi. And most of the workers, most of the people in these settlements work in these two neighborhoods, in these two industrial hubs, which is not very far, which is close by. And we have done that kind of a reiki to the work, to the places, and we have been on our way to register ourselves as a cooperative. So that is happening. So lastly, we are planning to do working towards to ensure the rights and entitlements for the people who are living in these 2-3 settlements, which I can talk about when we come to the question and answer session. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking your time.
Okay, thanks a lot for the presentation. Now we have until 12:45 for a few questions to the panelists. Since there's very little time, I will abstain from asking warm-up questions and go straight to the questions from participants, which are quite many right now. Go ahead. Does anybody have any questions? Please write on the chat or use the function to raise your hand. Hello, participants. Do you have any questions to the panelists? This is the moment to ask. We have still about 10 minutes time. There are no questions on the chat and nobody's. Oh, Patricia, great. Go ahead.
These presentations are very, very interesting because they focus on the real essence, I would say, the real meaning of cooperation. And they suggest us how important it is to have this kind of enterprises. And I have a general question for all the colleagues presented their works. And we have seen important example of cooperatives really providing services, fundamental services, really looking for a solution to the residents' needs. And so my question is, in addition to that, to the fact that they are providing fundamental needs, do you think that this solution, the cooperative solution, instead, for instance, a solution based on charity, could increase the human capital in the sense that could permit to members to increase their ability, their skills in running an association, a cooperative, an enterprise?
Who would like to answer first? This is a question to all the panelists.
I have the question to the question. Can you repeat the question about the human capital?
Yeah, so the point is that some services to the population, to residents, can be provided also by charity association. So the difference between a cooperative and a charity is the fact that members can learn by doing activities within the cooperative and can become a sort of entrepreneur, entrepreneurs, I mean cooperative entrepreneurs. So my question is, what is your experience in the case study where you are analyzing? What is your experience from this point of view? Did the cooperative solution contributed to the cultural and I would say also in terms also of business culture, increase the skills of members?
Maybe I'll just fastly start and shortly. In the case of the small village community, it very surely is the case that there were about 5 self-employed entrepreneurs who developed something and went to the world and said, this I'm doing, and they were very self-conscious. And also there are more projects in development, and that surely is because they had this opportunity to voice their own needs and to find solutions within the community and to also use the community grounds for their entrepreneurship. So yes, for sure, I'd say that's very true.
Can I add?
Of course.
I mean, just for example, the way we have been trying to work with the settlements and with the workers living in these areas, in these settlements, what I would see is, I mean, you can tell me I'm being looking more, whatever, in a classical sense, whatever, that I see this as a return of a class politics, and where initially one could see in the previous age where the question of class was emerging, was emerging from out of the era of exploitation. And here I could see that the return of class is coming through the era of exclusion, where a certain class, people from certain class are being excluded by the state's discourse and state sphere, and especially in the third world and countries like India, where the political sphere has becoming more and more rigid and going towards right. I see this as a return of a class politics. And second, the cooperative model, the old model, I'm not sure and how much I can talk about the old models, but the new models speaks about not only the ownership of collective, but at the same time responsibility of collective, in a way where one could see the limitation of neoliberal policy as well as the nation states on politics. So that's these two things I see as why the cooperative should be the way in whatever should be the way forward. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Would Andrzej or Magdalena would like to?
Yeah, you can risk, because I suppose that there were at least 2 patterns of the question from Patricia. So the first pattern I see, because you asked about the challenge-based, let's say, activity or the innovation, if I understood correctly. So basically all of these cooperatives or the movements that have been presented, actually, it's always a challenge-based, because they are related to resolving some issues or some problems, or actually challenges to keep much more positive thinking. And in case, for example, of my field of the studies on aging, we are trying to get rid of focusing on problems, actually, because when you are focusing on problems of aging, that means basically very controversial things, that the older people are the problem, actually, right? So it says something really bad about our societies and economics. So basically, we are much more trying to refocus the language to not focus on ageism, let's say, attitudes, but on challenges, how we can cope with the challenge, and stop talking the things like that the aging, for example, and the bigger population of the older people is a problem that will be like the tsunami or the silver tsunami and things like that, like the care issues, etc. And the second pattern of your question, I suppose, it was about this human capital, etc. Is it contributing to that? So basically, from the theoretical, let's say, perspective, you can always hypothesize that if the people are, because that's much more related to the creative theories, to be honest, or the innovation theories. If the people are collaborating with each other and they are meeting each other, even online, actually, they are exchanging some ideas, exchanging some knowledge, exchanging some skills. And it's not always measurable how this, let's say, impact is visible, right? So I know that during the last couple of years, there is plenty of studies how to measure the impact of entities like this one that we have presented. But like to sum up this question, the answer to this question, it depends. Do you see these things from the instrumental perspective or not? Because when I focus on public policies, I have to be much more instrumental, because I have to, let's say, suggest or calculate how all those activities will be useful or could be useful for the government or the local governments or the regional one. And in the case of, for example, art and creativity, a lot of those things that the people are doing, actually, they are not doing this because the government tell them to do that, but because they want to have fun, right? Or to have well-spent leisure time during the retirement, because they have nothing else to do, maybe like caring about the grandchildren, etc. Right? So it's a question about the instrumentality, I think, because when you are talking about the human capital, it's always instrumental, calculating, do those people have the skills, etc. You can measure that. Okay, so that's it. I see that there are some questions on a chat, basically.
Yes, I still want to give a chance to Magdalena Kondas to reply to this question. Magda, would you like to?
Yes, I would like to. Actually, I would be skeptical in terms of assuming that the cooperation itself must be a solution to the problems that we face, because I think it was already proven that the capitalism does also know how to use cooperation to pursue its own ambitions and to pursue its own logic. So as we can see it through development aid, the cooperatives themselves are also the places where the ideology can be spread. So in fact, they are also, they can be entry points for the World Bank, for example, where they can send their trainers and try to convince people that if they are entrepreneurs themselves, they can bring the bright future just engaging into market relations and market exchange. But in fact, there is also like the risk of being apolitical, of focusing too much on the problems of the certain community or the certain cooperative. And there is the risk that people involved in such activity do not see the or are somehow encouraged not to see the whole picture and the perspective which shows the power relations. So I think that the cooperation itself, like, it depends what is the content of this cooperation. Because what I saw in Armenia is that cooperatives that were supported by development aid are usually, let's say, weak, and they don't deliver the objectives that they are about to deliver. But in fact, there are other fields of cooperation which is not orchestrated by development aid. So, for example, some struggles around ecological issues or some struggles around political issues. And I think that this kind of cooperation, which is not orchestrated and not formed into the certain entity operating in the legal frameworks, might be more effective in terms of changing the system and giving people the actual power and feeling of a sense of belonging and tools to change both their, let's say, inside capital and also communities and the social system around.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Magda. Sarah, do you want to react, or can we proceed to the last question?
That's what I wanted to do to this question from Gesine. Yes.
Okay, let me
Maybe
read
she
the
also
question
wants
so that
to say something first.
Gesine Belmer, would you like to ask the question yourself, or should I read it?
You can just read it out loud. That's all right, to make it short.
Okay, thank you. So the question is, what about the structure, hierarchy in the cooperations you talked about? How to deal with the need of decision making and so on? Who would like to start?
I'll do the first once more, and try to keep it short as well. Of course, decisions have to be made, and sometimes there doesn't seem to be the time to have these consensus processes with everyone. And I think we all see that. But a hierarchy and power does not mean that there should not be a hierarchy in responsibility. So that is not necessarily the same. There can be a power with the others where the responsible persons, for example, the key group that really has knowledge about the direction the project should go, that these are entitled to take decisions more fastly, and they only make around, get it to a decision and inform the others, and then maybe there's time for a veto, but more often they just say, oh, that's okay. So yeah, just this difference between the power over and this power with. And if there people get the impression someone is not really deciding in the mind of the community, then that has to be voiced, and there has to be a space for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Who would like to address this question next? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I also wanted to add something to this actually, and this idea of hierarchy is very important also in India, because as you know, the society, and especially because of the caste system, the society is very hierarchical. So when we are talking about cooperatives, actually, we are breaking some of these hierarchies, and what we are trying actually to break some of this. And we're also trying to create more of an understanding between, to cut across caste boundaries. And also we didn't have the time to explain also some things that, for instance, in the settlements that we've been cooking, there are people belonging to different castes, there are people belonging to different religious groups, there are people belonging to so many other types of communities and so many other type of sects and everything. So then what we try to do actually, it is to create of a cooperation between all of this. So this idea of the hierarchy, actually, it has a very strong importance in India, because of, and creating a cooperative actually is much more important perhaps than in other places because of this. And of course, the decision making and stuff, also it's an idea of empowering some of these people who might be, because of the background of the caste and background of the religious background, they might be put into minority. So then by giving them this opportunity of being equal in a legal sense, of course it's much more empowering. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead,
Hi,
Praveen.
do you have a time?
Yeah, let's
No, I just wanted to say one,
this,
just adding into
round
that. Of course, the
answers.
question of hierarchy is not a mechanical question in that way. It's not that in the making of, it will come only in the making of cooperative and it won't emerge later on. Of course, it's an everyday question and a hierarchies, and especially in India or any other country or anywhere you have cooperative, the question of hierarchy can emerge anytime and any moment. So for us, I mean, from our own experience, I think the question of hierarchy is a question of praxis. That's why the learning by doing, the praxis is how do you deal with different hierarchies at the different moment of time? How do you deal with the gender hierarchies? How do you deal with the caste hierarchies? How do you deal with the different regional hierarchies in between that? So I mean, it's more of a question of praxis, and you have to keep engaging with the workers. You have to keep engaging with the people who are part of your cooperative in a larger sense, subjectively as well as objectively. And the moment you start dealing with it, you might come with new hierarchies. You might have to deal with the hierarchies which didn't surface at all till now. So more of a question of praxis for us. Where these kind of it's an everyday question, and it depends on how one deal with that.
Thank you. Andrzej, Magda, would you like to respond to this question? If not, we will conclude here. Last chance. Magda?
Yeah, I just want to say that in terms of hierarchies inside cooperatives or the institution of mutual aid that I investigated, that was not the question that appeared very soundly. But I think that what deserves the further investigation is, for example, who is leaving cooperatives. So because I had a chance to speak only with active members in terms of working cooperatives and those which were established by development aid apparatus. But I think that if we go deeper into who was left aside and who decided to let's say just quit this activity, I think this could also give the better insight into how the different flows of individual aims, objectives were present in such cooperatives. But what I think also about this hierarchy in the case of if we have direct involvement of definitely stronger partner, which is NGO or international agent, there is also like the sound question about the power in such initiatives. And this also poses the question like who decides and what is the hierarchy, not only in the cooperatives, but with the external partners and other cooperatives. So this is something that is moderated by experts in international aid, and I think that this deserves further investigation. And I don't want to assume anything right now, as I didn't go deeper into this question.
So if I may, I can also add something on that, because Magdalena a little bit touched this topic, because I want to flip a little bit this question about the hierarchies, because actually the thinking about the social economy and the cooperations, cooperatives should direct you actually to not think about the hierarchies, but about the horizontal relations, that the people are equal or they are on the same level of the bonds in the network. So basically that it's not hierarchical, but it's flattened, let's say, and horizontal. And as Magdalena mentioned a little bit, actually from the perspective of the policies, it's much more interesting actually to measure the relations between the people inside or outside, between the cooperatives or other entities actually in a horizontal actually frame to focus on networks actually, because you can, as a for example, as a government or the United Nations, you can actually govern or do some stimulations on the network of networks actually. So it's much more interesting actually topic, but probably for another conference.
Okay, thanks a lot, Andrzej. We are already past the planned time, so I must conclude the discussion here. But there will be also space to network and discuss. There is an announcement from the admin about that.